Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Daenerys IV. The Queen of the Crown Lands and Dorne looked up at the Iron Throne, thinking not for the first time how ghastly the chair was. She knew well, as Viserys loved to remind her, that the throne was forged by Balerion the Black Dread's fire, and from the swords of Aegon the Conqueror's enemies. It was an impressive tale, but the seat certainly failed to live up to the legend. Since Daenerys and Aegon had yet to figure out who would actually sit on the throne, two wooden chairs, each decorated with beautifully carved dragons, had been placed a step down from the iron monstrosity, to show that, for the time being, they ruled as joint rulers. Deciding who sat on the Iron Throne was one of many messes that she and her nephew had to clean up, along with creating a joint Kingsguard and 1,000 other issues. Daenerys was still unsure of what to make of her nephew. His emotions seemed to flow like the wind over the grass plains of the Dothraki Sea. He would be headstrong and arrogant to angry and foolish to charming and polite. It vexed Daenerys because it was not at all what she expected from her brother's son, a man whom Sarah Barristan said was to always be very calm and collected. She felt like Aegon was trying to make up for something, like he was trying too hard to be something he wasn't. But Eddard looked the part, and her children had proven him as such. Viserion has a particular liking to him. It also helped that the man controls most of Daenerys' army, including the majority of the sellsword companies, and the Dornish. Daenerys turned when she heard the sound of the great doors opening. Robb Stark, flanked by two of his guards, marched in, and Daenerys was reminded again that Stark looked, for lack of a better word, kingly. The quiet confidence that the young man held, along with the way he spoke and moved, to Daenerys, it was more than confidence. The young king had an aura of authority and power around him that came from more than the land and men he controlled. It came from his house. The Starks have always been known as good and honorable, and Robb had certainly lived up to that expectation. Especially since wagons filled to the brim with food had begun to enter the city, much to Daenerys and others' relief. The two warriors behind him looked quite fierce. One was the tall, large, blonde woman, who seemed to shadow the man's every step, while the other was Sandor Clegane, brother of the late Gregor Clegane. A terrifying man in his own right, he at least was able to show some amount of emotion, although that emotion was usually indifference or disdain. "My lady," Robb greeted as he got closer. "I must admit, I am rather curious why you have asked for me." Daenerys didn't need to look behind her to know that Sarys Barristan had moved from his place by the pillars to stand behind his queen. Like the blonde woman for Robb Stark, Sarys Barristan the Bold was Daenerys' own shadow. "The treaty is to be signed in a few days," Daenerys explained. "I saw no better time to get to know the father of the son my daughter will marry." Robb smiled apologetically. "The treaty will be ironed out in a few days. I am afraid that, due to the birth of my son, I must put off signing it for another week or more." Daenerys' smile wavered. "I trust your wife and your child are safe." Robb's smile grew. "Tyrann is strong and healthy, my lady." "Dany, please," Daenerys said. "We are alone. No need to be so formal." Robb raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Very well, Dany. My son is just fine. The birth was hard on my wife, and she may need more time to recover than the maesters thought." Robb shrugged. "You'll understand if I don't decide to sign something till she is able to be there with me." "You are keen to include her in the moment," Daenerys mused. "If I may be honest, Margaery has been practically running the lands under my control while I have focused on the war," Robb admitted without any hint of jealousy or bitterness. "I also would not hear the end of it if I did not include her in such an event." Daenerys grinned and motioned for Robb to follow her. "I have been told that it is custom for lords to pay homage to their king after the birth of a prince or princess." Robb's smile lessened. "Unfortunately so. It is not a tradition I am fond of, but it is one that I will acknowledge." The Northern King hesitated for a moment before adding, "Although I am looking forward to the event, as it will allow my family to be together again." "You mean your brother in the north," Daenerys said. Robb hesitated again. "And more. My father, mother, and my youngest sister and brother shall be joining him." Daenerys stopped in her tracks, and turned to look at Robb. "Eddard Stark is alive?" Robb nodded. "He was saved by unknown allies that have very recently made themselves known." He and my sister Arya were saved before my father had a chance to be executed. So Cersei killed an innocent man, Septon Barristan said quietly. Robb turned his gaze on the old knight. Are you surprised? They also lied about having both my sisters. Forgive me, but what was your father doing in the north? Daenerys asked, although soon as the question was out, it sounded foolish. Eddard Stark was the warden and lord paramount of the region. It was obvious why he would return to the north. Robb thankfully did not take it as a stupid question. As you know, the Boltons and others turned their cloaks for the Lannisters. They even managed to capture my mother. My father returned to the north to rescue her. And he was rescued from the Black Cells. Daenerys mused as the group continued to walk. They must be a powerful group to have infiltrated the Red Keep. It seems that they have their ways. Robb agreed. Anyways, my father and the rest of my family are coming south. You must be happy to see them, Daenerys said. Words cannot explain, Robb said, a slight smile on his face. I haven't seen my father Arya and Rickon in over a year. Hence why I am eager for this war to be over. They must also be anxious to meet your wife and child, Daenerys added. Robb grinned. Very true. The group emerged from the castle and into the Godswood. Already, she could hear her children in the distance and smell the charred meat. It seems that Robb's two guards noticed this as well as their hands flew to their swords. Since we are to become allies, I thought it only right to show you my children, Daenerys said with a slight smirk on her face. Come. The group traveled through the Godswood till they came to the clearing where Daenerys' 3 dragons were housed. When House Targaryen still had dragons, they were kept in the dragon pit, but Daenerys refused to house her children in such a place. The Godswood gave them much more room to grow. Drogon was Daenerys' pride and joy. The largest and wildest of her children, she believed that he was burying the Black Dread come again. His scales were black as night, while his horns and spinal plates were blood red. Daenerys had trouble controlling him at times, but the dragon was fiercely protective of her. He was named after Daenerys' late husband Khal Drogo, her son and stars. Rhaegal's scales were jade green with bronze eyes. He, like his other hatchmate Viserion, was smaller than Drogon. He is a calmer dragon, almost boring, if such a word could describe a dragon. It was like he had taken on the personality of the man she had named him after. Rhaegar, her brother, the Bard Prince. Viserion is Daenerys' 3rd child. He has cream-colored scales that could be confused for white, while his horns and spinal crest are gold. While Drogon is magnificent to behold, Viserion is beautiful. He is also the mount for Aegon, the two forging some sort of bond that Daenerys was trying to figure out. He was named after Viserion, Daenerys' other brother who died in Stark. Robb and his guards came to an abrupt stop at the edge of the clearing, clearly surprised by the dragons. Daenerys continued walking forward before stopping and looking back at the Northern King. It is quite all right, my lord, she said. Robb didn't look afraid, more apprehensive, and rightfully so, but he nodded slowly and began to walk towards Daenerys, keeping an eye on the dragons. He did not hold his sword, thankfully, nor did he look particularly threatening. Like approaching a new dog, Robb moved forward slowly and respectfully. Daenerys didn't expect her children to pay the Northern King much attention, but Rhaegal defied expectations when he left the goat carcass and moved towards Robb. Daenerys heard the startled cry from his guards, but the Northern King held his hand up to stall his warriors, holding his ground while the dragon got in his face and sniffed him up and down. Rhaegal, Daenerys scolded, hoping that the dragon would back up, but he didn't. It was like he smelt something on Robb, but wasn't able to find it. After a moment, he backed up, shook his head in annoyance, huffed, and went back to his food. I'm sorry, I didn't expect him to do that. Daenerys apologized. Robb raised an eyebrow. It's fine. I'm not burned to a crisp, so I'll take it as a compliment. The Northern King gazed at her children with a new appreciation. When my brother found the direwolf pups, I was stunned. They're magnificent. Daenerys had seen Robb's direwolf, and would concede that the beast was a master of the wild, a born and bred hunter that controlled the land. But her dragons were kings of the wild and had no equal.
Are you sure? Aegon wants me to see them?
Robb joked. Daenerys smiled and crossed her arms. They are my children, and we are to be allies. Are we not? You say that they are your children, Robb said. Why? I was married once to a Dothraki horse lord, Daenerys explained. He died. I stepped into his pyre with 3 eggs and emerged with 3 dragons. Interesting story, Robb mused. Ser Jorah, as well as others who were there that night, would tell you the same. Daenerys said, wondering if Robb thought she was lying. I did not say that it was not true, only that it was interesting. Robb said easily, dragons are creatures of magic. I would be saddened if your story was anything less than hard to believe.
You believe in magic?
Daenerys asked. Robb hesitated. I've had my encounters, both good and bad, he answered quietly. You surprise me, Robb Stark. Daenerys said before she could stop herself. I did not think you would believe in magic. I am from the north, Dunny. We still believe in White Walkers, Robb joked. And if it means anything to you, my wife can read me like an open book. So I am happy that I can still surprise anyone. Line break. I am sorry to hear about your good father. Daenerys said as they walked away from the Godswood. I hear he died fighting a great warrior. Victorian Greyjoy is said to be one, Robb agreed. It has been tough on my wife and her family, but I think they are coming to terms with it all. He died honorably, and that's all anyone can ask for. Forgive me, my lord, but what of Victorian Greyjoy? Ser Barristan asked. Dead, Robb answered. Lord Mace wounded him with his last breath, and Ser Jon Fossaway took his head. The group arrived back in the throne room. Daenerys could feel their time coming to a close, feeling Robb's anxiety to return to his wife. She had one more topic of discussion that she wanted to go over. Why? Daenerys asked, not knowing how else to start. I'm sorry? Robb asked, turning to look at her. My family committed horrible crimes against yours, and yet you still agreed to peace, Daenerys said. Why? Robb crossed his arms. Who am I? Daenerys frowned. Robb Stark, she answered. Was I alive during the war between our two families? Robb asked. Daenerys shook her head. No. Can I be blamed for my father's actions? Robb continued. Daenerys shook her head again, having an idea where the Northern King was going with all this. No, I believe not. You are not heiress, and I thank the gods for that, Robb said, getting to the crux of his point. And Aedin, well, he's a little rough around the edges. Daenerys couldn't help but chuckle. Robb was a likable person and most of his jokes lacked any sort of malice or insult. What I am saying is that we are not our fathers, Robb explained. Your father murdered my grandfather, an uncle, not you. Your brother ran away with my aunt, not Aegon. I believe in second chances. Call me optimistic, but I believe in people. Daenerys nodded. Thank you, my lord. Robb, please, Robb said. Thank you for your hospitality this afternoon, but I am afraid that I must return to my wife. Daenerys nodded. Of course, thank you. Robb nodded to her and to Ser Barristan before striding out. Daenerys watched him leave before turning to Ser Barristan. As usual, you've proven to be right, Daenerys said. It seems that peace was possible. I always thought there was. Ser Barristan said easily. There's always another option, my lady. Line break. Robb, that was highly dangerous. Sire, Brienne scolded Robb as they rode back to their encampment. What did you want me to do? Robb asked, turning in his saddle. Allow Clegane to try and hack off its neck. The hound grunted, which was the closest thing to a laugh that the man could produce from the time Robb has spent around him. Anything we did, it would have taken it as a threat, and I could have died. Robb continued, but it didn't kill me, so all is well. Brienne gazed at the king, before conceding the point with a nod. Robb knew that she meant well, and there were few he'd rather have at his back in a tough spot. But sometimes she took her job a little too seriously, which gave him a headache. But she always meant well, as he always reminded himself. It was an impressive display of power, wasn't it? Robb mused after a moment. My lord? Brienne asked. Showing us her dragons, Robb explained. Oh, saying that it was because we're becoming allies is a pretty lie, but there was an underlying threat there, or at the very least a warning. The dragons didn't look that big. Brienne commented. They get bigger, Sandor grunted. Exactly, Robb said. When Ser Barristan arrived weeks ago, offering a chance at peace, the Queen said that there would be advantages and disadvantages to both sides. The dragons are obviously an advantage for them because peace gives them time to grow. So what will you do about it? Sandor grumbled. They're fucking dragons. Robb smiled grimly at his new warrior. I'll do exactly what Dorne did, he said. I'll build weapons to take them down. But they're our allies, Brienne said, sounding stunned. True, Robb said, but do not forget that my ancestor created a sellsword company because he feared what the dragons and their riders could do. I agree to the idea of peace, but that does not mean that I won't prepare if war breaks out and my enemy has a fire-breathing monster. But you said, Brienne said. Brienne, Robb said, cutting off his captain. I understand what you're saying, but you are seeing all this from the surface. I have a duty to my people to protect them against all threats, confirmed and potential. Think of it like this. We're not currently on a battlefield. Why are you protecting me? Because someone might try to kill you, Brienne replied instantly. Robb gestured to the sprawling countryside. Who? The Lannisters are holed up in Casterly Rock. The Targaryens are our allies, who might try to kill me. Brienne thought for a moment. I understand. Good, Robb said before running a hand over his face. Gods above, I sound like a Tyrell. Took you long enough to notice. Sandor grunted. Robb did. The young monarch still couldn't believe the little bundle wrapped in his wife's arms. As a young man of 10 and 7, never in his wildest dreams did he expect to find himself in this position. A king of 5 of the 7 kingdoms, 2 more slowly coming under his domain, married to a beautiful woman with a son. He was also the leader of a massive army, and leading the peace talks with a house that had been exiled more than 20 years ago. There were even dragons to boot. The little baby code in his mother's arms, as the 2 young parents leaned against each other in their private chambers, enjoying the moment of silence and peace. Marjorie, even through the pregnancy, had done a magnificent job running the affairs of the realm with her grandmother, allowing Robb to focus solely on the war and the talks with the Targaryens. Since the birth, Olenna, Ser Brynden, and Lord Yon have taken over ruling while Marguerite recovered. Robb had also taken more of a part in ruling his lands, but the 3 older nobles insisted that Robb take the proper time to be with his son and wife. The kingdoms could wait. Torrhen was a Stark through and through, with curly black hair and brownish-gray eyes. Daisy had joked when she first saw the babe that he looked more like Eddard Stark than Robb did. The child reached out one hand, grabbing at the air. Robb moved his finger forward, enjoying the sensation of the child's weak strength, as he gripped his finger. The king smiled softly, chuckling as the babe tried to eat the finger he now had firmly in his grasp. I think he's hungry, Robb joked quietly. Marguerite laughed, stroking the few strands of dark hair on the baby's head, her eyes alight with love. The pain that she had gone through to bring the child into the world was a grain of sand in comparison to the mountain of love she had for him. The Rose of Highgarden removed one strap of her dress, leaving one side of her chest bare for the child to feed. While Torrhen was happily feeding, Robb moved to get himself a chalice of water. Robb knew that his mother had fed his siblings herself, while other noble women preferred to use a wet nurse. Marguerite, as soon as she fed Torrhen herself, refused to let anyone else do it. How have the talks gone with the Targaryens? She asked curiously. While she had tried to keep up with what was going on outside her chambers, the birth had left her weak and tired. Her grandmother had been her only source of information. Robb took a drink of water before answering, leaning on the small table. Ever since the army had set up a permanent camp outside the city, Gerlin had taken it upon himself to bring in certain items to make Marjorie's and the other women in the camp stay a little nicer. Now, the young royals had a good bed and a few other luxuries that would normally look out of place in a war camp. Daenerys has been very open and kind, and I think she is warming to the customs of Westeros, Robb answered. As for Aegon, I'm unsure. I rarely speak to the man unless I have to, and I still don't know what to make of him. He seems almost petulant, Marguerite said thoughtfully. Robb shrugged. Perhaps, I'm told he's had to hide his identity all his life. He only became Aegon Targaryen when he knew that he was returning to Westeros. Marguerite nodded. Do you think peace will be achieved soon? Robb smiled. Hopefully, I think when I have you by my side, we can finally be done with all this, and we can go home. Where is home? Marguerite asked curiously, standing up. Torrhen had fallen asleep in the middle of feeding, and Marguerite laid the child in his cradle to sleep, pulling a blanket over him. When Torrhen was down, Marguerite grabbed Robb's free hand and stood in front of him, having to look up slightly. Robb raised an eyebrow. Winterfell, of course. But your father has returned, Marguerite pointed out, looping her arms around her husband's neck. Can you truly rule from there? What about the Reach, the Vale, the Stormlands? Robb frowned. I'm not sure, he admitted. During this entire war, I always just figured we'd go back to Winterfell. Margaery smiled softly. Robb had grown both as a man and a politician since his time in the South, but at his core, he was still a Northman who was good and pure, unused to the Southern ideals. I have an idea, she said easily. Robb chuckled. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Even when Aegon the Conqueror came to Westeros and established King's Landing, it was inherently flawed because of the location of the city. It was too far south for places like the North or the Iron Islands. Margaery explained, if we are to rule the Stormlands as well as the North, we need to be in the middle. Robb saw through her words. Harrenhal, he said. Margaery nodded. Lady Owen died in Captain. The castle is a barren ruin of itself, but with the right leadership, it could rival King's Landing. Robb said. Margaery smiled. Exactly. Robb kissed her. You're brilliant, he said happily. Margaery laughed. I have also given thought to your counsel, she said, walking over to a bedside table, picking up a couple sheets of parchment. Robb chuckled. You gave birth not a few days ago, and you already have thoughts on our council. Margaery looked up when he spoke. Our council? Robb nodded. You're going to be on my council, he promised. I can think of no one else who I'd rather have by my side. Margaery blushed before handing the lists over to her husband, who looked over them. The King's Council? Robb asked. Margaery nodded. If we are truly going to have an alliance with the Targaryens, then I thought it best not to copy them. Your Kingsguard will be changed to the Wolfguard, she pointed out. Robb looked over the list. Many of the members she suggested to the Wolfguard were warriors who had fought with him through the war and had proven their loyalty and mettle. In addition, many were fighters who were not heirs to noble houses, and thus would be able to join the ranks of the Special Guard. As for the council seats, there was a new seat. Each position had a few names jotted down for who might be most suited for the task. The only position that was without a name was Hand of the King. Robb looked up curiously at his wife, who had been watching his facial expression as he had read through the lists. Hand of the King, Master of Coin, Lady Anya Wainwood, Lord Janos Bracken, Master of Laws, Lord Jon Royce, Sir Brendan Tully, Master of Ships, Lord Jason Mallister, Lord Paxton Redwine, Master of Whispers, Lord Howland Reed, Lady Olenna Tyrell, Master of War, Lord Randall Tarley, Wolfguard, Brienne of Tarth, Sir Aloras, Tyrell, Sarah and Storm, Sir Balin Swan, Sekka Garth Hightower, Sarah Brar Royce, Sir Haber Redwine. The positions of Grand Maester and Lord Commander Robb knew would be decided at a later date. You left the position of Hand empty, he pointed out. Margaery nodded. I loathe to admit it, but I had the most trouble with that position. Many people I thought of were needed elsewhere. What about Willis? Robb asked. He had heard good things about the new Lord of Highgarden, and was eager to meet him when he arrived in a few days to meet his new nephew. He will be needed in the Reach, Margaery replied. If my father were still alive, I would immediately make a suggestion for my brother. But Victarion Greyjoy changed that, she said, wiping her eyes. Although her father died a hero, battling a great warrior, his death was still fresh in Margaery's mind. And the other great commanders I have with are already top candidates for seats on the council, Robb said, looking over the council once more. Then he thought of something. What about Tyrion Lannister? Margaery was caught off guard by his suggestion. We fought a war with his family, she replied. We still have his brother and many of his relatives as our prisoners. We have a host besieging his home. Robb nodded. All true, but I can't help but think about what Sansa said. I spoke with her after we returned, and after all the tears she shed because of her torment at the hands of Joffrey and Cersei, she spoke about how Tyrion had been good to her, and had kept Cersei and her sadistic son in check well enough. I was curious why Sansa wanted the imp free, Margaery said. But if you appoint him your hand, it won't go over well with anyone. Robb nodded. Perhaps, he mused, but Jon did speak well enough of him with the short time they spent together. And your mother had him captured, which forced Tywin Lannister to invade the Riverlands. Margaery argued. Robb held a hand up to stop the argument that was about to break out. Varys has proven that it was Joffrey who tried to kill Bran, not Tyrion, but I understand what you're saying. When Robb had ventured to King's Landing to see Daenerys, he had been stopped by Varys, the Targaryen spymaster, and asked for a moment of his time. He had pulled the Northern King into some empty chambers and explained that it had been Joffrey, not Tyrion, who had tried to have Bran killed to impress his father. It was yet another crime to add to the boy's long list. Varys had proven his statement by saying that the dagger the men used was won by Robert Baratheon from Petyr Baelish. Joffrey had stolen the dagger from his father's things. Robb put the papers aside so that he could place his hands in his wife's. I am not naming the man my hand, I was merely thinking, he said. Besides, I still have him under guard. He, the sellsword, and the boy. What do you plan to do with that lot? Margaery asked. Robb shrugged. I'm not sure. Going off Sansal's word, I was considering giving the imp Casterly Rock. Margaery raised an eyebrow. You would give the Lannisters back the rock after Tarly spent months taking it. Robb shook his head. No, I simply meant I would use the man to bring the rock to heel, he explained. Then he can take it as his seat, and Lord Tarly can take Lancey Sport. Robb stopped before adding, I guess I am giving the imp the rock. Margaery was about to argue, then saw the value in his logic. With Tyrion Lancel Fort, he would be in an ideal position for the form of government that the Rose of Highgarden has been quietly discussing with her grandmother. Even the imp could help with that, if Tyrion was given the seat she wanted him at on the King's Council. I take it your silence means you agree with me, Robb chuckled. What makes you believe that Tyrion will be a good lord? She asked. After all, Tywin never formally named him his heir, according to my grandmother. Sansa has spoken highly of him. Robb pointed out again. As did Jon. Perhaps when Willis arrives I can have him speak with the man and get an idea for who he is, he suggested. You on the word of your sister about the man? Margaery asked curiously. Would you not trust the word of Garland or Willis? Robb replied immediately, though not unkindly. Margaery was impressed. Robb was using a blend of his northern honesty with the southern tactics that her grandmother and she had subtly taught him. She was further intrigued to see what he said. And for an heir? Tommen, Robb said instantly. Joffrey deserves execution for his role in the war, along with the fact that he tried to kill my brother, but Tommen is a good kid, and if we keep him with us for a few years, we can turn him into a loyal kingsman before turning him over to Tyrion, so that he can learn how to rule Casterly Rock. You seem to have all this figured out then. Margaery chuckled. Robb shrugged. Not thinking about the war has given me time to do such a wild thing, he joked. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft sounds of Torrhen's cry as he woke from his nap. Robb smiled gently. A parent's work is never done, he chuckled, picking up the child. The babe smiled a toothless grin when he looked at his father, gurgling as he kicked his feet. Robb smiled, looking down at his son. Even if the war was finally declared to be at an end tomorrow, he would give up his crown and titles if it meant his son would live a long and happy life. Robb acceptance. Robb thought that Cersei looked like shit when she first emerged from the keep. Joffrey, the blonde prick, looked 100 times worse. The cocky look he adopted from his father, his true father, was gone, replaced with a look of terror and misery. His eyes were rimmed red from his constant sobbing, and his voice had become scratchy and practically useless from all the screaming and ranting he did when he had first been imprisoned. His character had been stripped down to what it had always been, a bully and a craven. Cersei tried to look strong, but weeks of captivity had broken down her resilience, and now she just hobbled forward, prodded by some of Mormont's gold cloaks. Clothed in a simple cloth dress that was barely better than a sack, without any pride, she didn't look quite as beautiful as Robb thought she had been when he first saw her in Winterfell. He had been told once that Cersei was like gold and beautiful. Now she looked like rusted iron, corroded and brittle. Robb stood with Sir Brynden and Brienne off to the side of the dais, allowing the Targaryens to run this event. They were in the courtyard of the Red Keep, with a massive crowd of commoners held at bay by a line of unsullied and gold cloaks. A single block had been placed near the edge of the dais, with a wicker basket right next to it. Daenerys and Aegon stood together, their council and guards just off to the side. Both were dressed in red and black clothing, and Robb couldn't help but admit that they looked like royalty. Perhaps it was the ancestry of their house, but they looked the part of king and queen, though Robb did note that there was a tension between them, something he had noticed more than once. Cersei Lannister, Aegon called, his voice carrying over the crowd and courtyard. You are guilty of usurping the throne, incest, and murder. Robb suppressed a smile. He knew well that the Targaryens didn't give a damn about Cersei killing Robert Baratheon. But it was one more crime to add to her name, and one more reason for her to face the block. Though the rumor of her ordering the murder of children did help the charge of murder. You will face the block for your crimes. Aegon continued. As Aegon said this, a shambling hulk of a man wearing a white cloak came forward, placing a greatsword point down in front of him. Robb frowned before realizing that the man was a Kingsguard, and probably a former member of the Golden Company, given the gold rings that covered one arm. I didn't do anything, Cersei cried, resisting against her guards. I loved Robert. You didn't, Robb said, taking a step forward. He nodded to Aegon and Dany, who nodded back, allowing him to continue. Robert Baratheon was a shell of himself, a man who fed his depression with food and women, Robb stated. While you fornicated in the same bed with your brother, Jaime Lannister. Lies! Cersei screamed. Take a look at the boy, Robb called, pointing at Joffrey's pathetic figure, gold hair and green eyes. Just like you, like the Kingslayer, like all your children. And if that is not enough evidence, you admitted your crime to my father here in this very castle. Cersei's face went white. Eddard Stark is dead. He is alive and well, Robb countered. You will pay for your crimes, for they are beyond vile and as numerous as the stars. Sarah Franklin? Aegon called, nodding to the knight as Robb stepped back into his place. The hulking knight nodded and readied his sword, as Cersei was forced to her knees, and her neck was placed. She continued to scream and struggle, but she was no match for her captors. The knight's sword came up and down, swift and sure, carving through Cersei's neck in a single stroke. The crowd went wild, cheering and clapping. Aegon had a brilliant smile on his face, and Daenerys also looked rather pleased. They were finally putting usurpers to the sword. Joffrey was next to be pushed forward. Joffrey Waters, not only are you a bastard born of incest, you too usurped the throne and ordered the killing of innocents. Aegon declared, like your mother, you too shall face the block. Joffrey didn't say a word, and simply burst into tears. It was a miserable sight for Robb to witness, but not for the crowd. They jeered and booed, making their hate for the boy well known. The crowd noise got louder when Joffrey was forced onto the block, and he lost control of his bowels. The boy can't even die cleanly. Sarah Brynden grumbled.
He's a coward.
Robb responded quietly, not taking his eyes off of Joffrey. He's always been a coward. Good riddance, Brian said simply. Septon Franklin's sword went up and came down in one smooth motion, taking off Joffrey's head in a single stroke. As his body was being hauled off, Robb saw Varys motion for the guards to go grab someone else. Cersei and Joffrey usurped the throne that rightfully belongs to our family, Aegon called, taking Daenerys' hand. Petyr Baelish, former master of coin under the usurper, is one who plunged the realm into chaos and carnage, as he is the one who started a war between House Stark and House Lannister. Robb's head snapped up when he heard this. Two more gold cloaks came forward with a disheveled Petyr Baelish between them. Baelish looked overly cocky, which annoyed Robb.
Petyr Baelish, you are charged with corruption, theft, and causing untold damage and death to the realm,
Aegon declared. You will face the block. Baelish smiled lazily at the Targaryen king. Forgive me, my lord, but I know of no such thing.
Varys tutted from his place on the stage.
Come now, my old friend. Your game is up. And what game might that be? Baelish asked innocently. You coerced Lysa Arryn into killing her husband, Jon Arryn. You then lied to Catelyn Stark and told her that it was the Lannisters who killed him. Varys explained, laying out Baelish's entire wicked plot. You also told her that it was Tyrion Lannister who tried to have Bran Stark killed when it was really Joffrey. This caused Lady Stark to capture Tyrion Lannister, which started a war between the two houses. Baelish could only smile. That is a pretty tale, but it holds no water. Where is the proof? Varys produced a leather-bound journal from behind his back. Here is all your dealings, along with many letters from your dear Lysa telling you about all she did for you. Baelish's mask crumbled as his lies were exposed. He looked frantically around and spotted Robb. King Robb, Sarah Brynden. I am friends with Catelyn Stark. Have her brought here. She will show you all my innocence. Robb crossed his arms. No, he answered firmly. You see, unbeknownst to you, before Lysa Arryn killed herself, she told all her bannermen that she killed Jon Arryn for you. It was a lie, as Lysa Arryn didn't mean to tell everyone what she had done. But she had been rambling mad and the truth had escaped her lips within earshot of the lords and ladies of the Vale. Still, it made Robb's point that the man would be receiving no help from House Stark or House Tully. Baelish began to be pulled towards the block. No, no, I have money, Baelish cried. I'll pay you. I'm afraid you have no money at all, Varys called after him. You see, you skimmed 3 million dragons from the crown into your own pocket, stealing from the Lannisters, the Iron Bank, and many others. That money has already gone back to paying back the crown's debts. Baelish kept struggling all the way to the block, and only stopped struggling when his head was in the wicker basket with Cersei's and Joffrey's. The crowd cheered, and Aegon and Daenerys embraced them, waving and smiling. Robb stayed off to the side, watching the event. Finally, the crowd began to disperse, and the Targaryens returned to the Red Keep. Robb felt a light tap on his shoulder. It was Varys. Lord Varys, Robb said politely. My lord? Varys bowed slightly. I found something in Baelish's belongings that I thought you should have. The spymaster produced a sheathed dagger from his belt, handing it to Robb. Robb took the dagger and ran a hand over the hilt. It was polished dragon bone. And Robb had a feeling that he had seen the weapon before. He unsheathed the blade, and remembered where he had seen it. It had been in the hand of the catspaw who tried to kill Bran when he was in a coma. This is the dagger that the catspaw had, Robb said, weighing the weapon in his hand. How did you get it? I believe your mother gave it to Baelish when she came to the capital. Varys explained. Why didn't you give it to your king? Sarah Brandon asked. It was used to try and kill Brandon Stark, Varys answered with a slight shrug as he folded his hands inside his sleeves. Seems only logical that it goes to the injured party. Robb sheathed the blade and nodded to the eunuch. Thank you. Forgive me, my lord, but I hear that the signing of the treaty is to be delayed. Varys asked as Robb turned to leave. It is, Robb said. With my wife in her current position, I do not wish to sign anything without her by my side. Varys bowed slightly. Of course, he said before walking away. Line break. Robb stood in the center of his tent, while Margaery sat in a wooden throne to his right, as they received nobles and knights who presented presents to the young royals. It was well known that Robb was not a fan of the tradition, but he still managed to show genuine gratitude when he was given something. The nobles and knights walked away with a spring in their step, certain that they had done their family proud. Robb accumulated swords, armor, shields, cloaks, and all sorts of finery from his bannermen that was collected by servants laid out behind Robb. Per Margaery's instructions, Robb was careful with the way he spoke, making sure not to show too much favoritism to any one man. The lords who had been working closely with Robb waited till the end to present their gifts. Sarah Brynden and Edmure led the procession of river lords up to Robb. Edmure carried a long wrapped object in his hands. Your Grace. Edmure greeted happily, handing the gift to Robb. Robb removed the wrapping and found a beautifully crafted longbow in his hand. It was perfectly balanced and lacquered to a dull brown color. Robb looked a little closer at the wood and found carvings of flowers, wolves, and fish. Fish, uncle? Robb said with a grin. The prince is the grandson of Eddard Stark and Mace Tyrell, Septas Brandon said formally. But he is also the great-grandson of Hoster Tully. Never let him forget. Robb grasped hands with both men. Of course. Thank you for this amazing gift. Robb received gifts from the Mollisters, Brackens, and Blackwoods, before the Lords of the Reach came forward, led by Guylan and a man wielding a ornate cane with one leg braced. He bowed deeply to both Robb and Margaery, and Robb's wife had a brilliant smile on her face. Your Grace, my queen, Willis said fondly. Robb helped Margaery up so that she could hug her brother, who had remained in Highgarden during the war. Robb knew that he had traveled with Sir Jon Fossaway as they made their way from Old Town to King's Landing, but he wanted to surprise his wife since he rarely got the opportunity. Willis, Margaery laughed as she hugged her brother. I didn't know you were coming. I sent word ahead, Willas replied, glancing at Robb, who had a knowing smile on his face. It seems the message didn't get passed on. Margaery gave Robb a mock glare before returning to her chair. Nevertheless, I am happy to see you. How is mother? Willis's smile faded. Perhaps later, yes. Marguerite, realizing what she had said, nodded quickly and dropped the subject. Of course, later. Your Graces, I have brought with me 2 of my finest horses, Willis explained. Wesley is as sturdy and stolid as I have ever seen, and will never fail you, Your Grace. Silver runs like the wind and is just as smooth. She's also a Morgan, which I know is your favorite, he said, nodding to Marguerite. He asked if he should bring a hound, but I said no for obvious reasons. Darylin added jokingly. Robb grinned and embraced both his good brothers. Thank you both of you. I hear you are quite the horse breeder, Wellis. I cannot wait to see how Wesley does. The Tyrell brothers bowed and stepped away for a man bearing a green apple to march forward. A young squire followed him, bearing a sheathed longsword. Both bowed to Robb and Marguerite. Your Graces, he greeted. Sir John, Robb said back, I wish to thank you for reclaiming Old Town. The knight bowed slightly. I only wish that I had gotten there sooner. He looked at Marguerite. My sincere condolences, my lady. Lord Mace was a great man. Marguerite smiled and wiped away a tear. Thank you, sir. I wish to present to the king a sword that was claimed during that battle. Sir John said as his squire offered the sword hilt first to Robb. Dunstan Drum died fighting, but I managed to reclaim his sword. Red Rain. Robb drew the sword, marveling at the red-tinged Valyrian steel, just like the sword Robb wore at his side. It was amazingly light and incredibly sharp. Robb had heard a rumor that the sword once belonged to House Rain, an extinct house from the Westerlands. A fine gift, Sarah, Robb said. You honor me. A weapon worthy of a king, Fossilway said easily, before bowing and leaving so that the next person can come forward. Randall Tarley marched up to Robb, his hands held behind his back. He still wore his battered functional armor and had his Valyrian steel greatsword, Heartsbane, strapped to his back. He bowed when he reached the Northern King. Your Grace, he greeted. Lord Tarley, I did not expect you here, Robb said. I thought you would have preferred to stay in the West. I had to do my duty, Tarley said. My son Dickon is currently besieging the Rock. The buggers inside still have to be worn down, still. And the Iron Islands? Marguerite asked. Lord Redwine is putting down the last of the resistance. Tarley answered. Robb nodded. He had been receiving constant reports from Tarley's short and bloody war in the Iron Islands. The Iron Fleet had been trapped and burned by the men of the Shield Islands and the Arbor, leaving the islands defenseless to Tarley's men and the Redwine fleet. The Lord of Hornhill had split up his host, taking most of the region in one swoop. The only island that had given up had been Harala, where Setter Harris, Harala had submitted to the men of the Reach. Pike had been no different. After conquering the town of Lordsport, Tarley himself had arrived on the island to take command of the siege. He didn't bother with siege equipment, but took a page out of Robert Baratheon's book and had the bridges that connected the 3 keeps destroyed. After that, it was only a matter of time before Balin gave in. Robb had already given his instructions to Tarley before the islands were even invaded. Balin Greyjoy and his brothers were to be executed, and that's the fate they received. With Vectum Greyjoy dead, Asha Greyjoy was now the Lady of Pike. However, she and many other Ironborn lords and heirs were prisoners in the north, in the Reach. As always, my lord, your work is exemplary, Robb said. The Iron Islands themselves are a gift to be sure. I did my duty, my lord, nothing more, Tarley said before presenting his gift, a hunting horn. This was crafted after the horn carried by Hernan of the Horn, one of the founders of my house. Robb took the horn, running a hand over the smooth ivory surface. It was without ornamentation, but it was still a masterfully crafted gift. It was also a very smart gift to give a king who is related to a famous hero from the Age of Heroes, an age that Herndon of the Horn lived in. A fine gift, my lord, Robb praised. Thank you. Robb continued to receive gifts from his closest allies. Lord Forrester presented him with an ironwood shield. Sarah Mortonway Newwood presented Robb with a wolf pelt cloak, while Marguerite received a fox pelt cloak. Lord Rhys presented Robb with a fearsome wolf helm that looked strangely like Greywind. When Robb thought that the event was finally at an end, the tent flap opened to reveal a young girl with long black hair that covered one side of her face like a curtain. She wasn't very pretty, but she held herself well. She was flanked by 2 men bearing the Black Stag of Baratheon. The girl herself carried a large book.
Shireen Baratheon.
Lord Caron whispered to Robb. Lady Baratheon, Robb called, remembering that he had sent the girl to Storm's End, escorted there by Ser Davos. That had not been a good message for Robb to receive. Taking Dragonstone hadn't been easy, nor had capturing the Red Woman. What no one had expected was Septa's Baratheon throwing herself into the sea, after seeing her castle taken and seeing the Red Priestess drowned. It had left Shireen parentless, but thankfully not without family. She was brought to Storm's End, where she became another ward, under Septus Cordnay Penrose alongside her bastard cousin Edric Storm, Robert Baratheon's bastard son that was kept safe from Sepsi's men. Shireen walked up to Robb, looking out of place in a group of men wearing armor and carrying swords. She wore a plain black riding garb with a black cloak bearing a golden stag head.
Your Grace,
she said, curtsying before Robb. For just a moment, Robb caught sight of the grayscale that covered one side of the girl's face. We did not expect you, my lady, Margaery said with a kind smile. We would have received you better. It is quite all right, my lady, Shireen said. Her voice was soft and sweet, but also intelligent. This was an impromptu trip. Robb smiled. That is a large book, my lady. One of my favorites, Shireen said. Wonders Made by Man, by Lomas Longstrider. An interesting favorite, Margaery commented. Many see it as a simple list of wonders, my lady, Shireen explained. I see it as a challenge. How so? Robb asked. Anything is possible, my lord, Shireen said. All that is needed is the courage to try. The room was silent after Shireen spoke. Robb looked down at the girl, who met his gaze unwaveringly. Robb got down on one knee and gently took the book, weighing it in his hands. This is a great gift, my lady, Robb said quietly. Shireen nodded towards the sectioned-off room, near the back of the tent, where Torrhen currently was, with Mira, Margaery's primary lady-in-waiting. It's for the prince, my lord, she replied. As a future king, he should believe more than anyone that anything is possible, especially the impossible. Robb smiled, wordlessly acknowledging Shireen's point. All the gifts he had received so far were either for him or for him, and Margaery, none so far had been only for Torrhen. It was a primary reason why Robb despised such traditions. Shireen was the only one who had given a gift that was meant specifically for Torrhen.
Then it is a perfect gift, my lady, Robb corrected, loud enough so that only Shireen could hear him.
Jon Aquindit fall. Jon stood at the bow of the Fury, looking out over the ocean. He had never been on a ship, but the motion wasn't that much different than being on horseback. Of course, the sea was calm now. Ser Davos joked that being on a ship was far different than being on a horse, because a horse will usually toss you backwards. On a ship being swamped by 20 and 30-foot waves, you would be thrown in all directions. Davos Seaworth was the oddest knight Jon had ever come across. Wendell and Wallace Manderly were what Jon expected knights to be. Strong, honorable, and brave, equipped with the best armor and weapons. Ser Davos Seaworth looked like the furthest thing from a knight, but perhaps was the closest thing to a perfect knight. Father had told him all about the Onion Knight, the former smuggler who had slipped past the Red Wine Fleet and braved Shipbreaker Bay to bring food to the starving people of Storm's End. That sort of unselfish bravery was the sort of thing the knights in Sansal's stories always had. Ser Davos was like that. He was humble and honest, extremely modest as well. There was an instant likability to him that came from the fact that he didn't hold himself about anyone else. Of course, he showed deference to Father and Lady Stark, along with Arya and Rickon. But even though he was the ship's captain and barked orders at his crew, he still treated every man fairly.
You spend a lot of time up here, lad,
Davos said, surprising Jon. The bastard of Winterfell nodded, greeting to the other man. There's not much to do on a ship, but watch the sea go by, is there? Seaworth grunted. Aye, fair enough. No sparring with Lord Stark. Jon and his father spent almost 2 hours a day in the middle of the deck with practiced swords in their hands, going back and forth. It was good for Jon because he was facing someone with far more experience than him, and it was good for his father because Jon was young and fast, forcing him to keep up. After Jon and his father were done, Arya would do her lessons with her dancing teacher, Serio Forel. He had found some very inventive ways to train Arya, and Lady Stark had gone pale more than once watching her daughter scramble up and down the rigging. But Jon had learned that Serio never did anything without purpose, and Arya was soaking in every lesson. "I haven't seen him today," Jon answered. He and Lady Stark broke their fast in their cabin. "The young lady is doing very well," Davos complimented, looking over his shoulder where Serio and Arya were training. "Bravose water dancing is very difficult. Aye, and far deadlier than any fighting form that we have here in Westeros," Jon added, turning to look at the master and apprentice. "I was tempted to spar with Serio, but my father told me that it wasn't a good idea." The man supposedly took down half a dozen men and a Kingsguard with a wooden sword. "Impressive," Davos grunted. "Though I don't know about the Kingsguard, Lord Stannis always complained that King Robert's Kingsguard were political appointments, not good knights like Ser Barristan." "Could be right," Jon said. He glanced around at the ocean. "Do you know where we are?" "Based on the stars I saw last night, I'd say somewhere off the fingers." Davos answered immediately. "I say we'll reach Gulltown in a day or two." "I thought we're heading for Maidenpool." "Indeed. Maidenpool is little less than a day's sail from Gulltown, if the winds are with us," Ser Davos explained. "From there it should be just a 2-day ride to King's Landing." "More," Father said, walking up to them. "We have 3,000 men marching on foot with us." "My lord," Davos said, bowing. "Father," Jon greeted. "Jon, grab Arya and meet me in my quarters," Father ordered, nodding to Ser Davos before walking away to talk to Osha. Jon nodded to Ser Davos as well before walking over to his sister. Arya was soaked in sweat, and Jon knew that she was in for an unpleasant and cold wash later in the day. Even though Lady Stark had accepted what Arya was becoming, there had been many compromises made as well. One was washing after each training session. "Jon," Arya said, wiping some stray hairs away from her face. "Father wants us," Jon said, nodding to Serio. "I'm almost done," Arya protested.
Go on.
Serio said, "Remember what I have said." Arya bowed. "Of course." Serio took her sword and walked off, leaving the girl in Jon's care. Jon grinned and ruffled Arya's hair before laying a hand on her shoulder and leading her towards their father's quarters. Usually, Arya would be asking 1,000 questions, but it seems like she was too tired to wonder why their father wanted them. Jon knocked on the door. "Come," Lady Stark called. Jon opened the door and ushered Arya in before following. Lady Stark was seated at a table with 4 chairs. A bed large enough for 2 people was placed against the opposite wall. The quarters were sparsely furnished, but it was better compared to the hammocks that the sailors slept in below deck. As soon as Arya was through the door, Lady Stark had dipped a napkin in some water and was wiping away the grim and sweat that had accumulated on her face. Arya made an annoyed expression, but stood still. It was another compromise that she had made with her mother. When Lady Stark was done, she nodded to Jon. Jon bowed slightly to her. "My lady." Their relationship had thawed tremendously since their conversation in the God's Wood at Riverrun. Lady Stark always referred to him as Jon without any hidden venom. On the rare times they spoke, she was polite, though still reserved. Jon, on his part, was the very same and always referred to her Lady Stark or my lady. "Good, you're both here," Father said, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "Sit." "What's going on?" Arya asked, her curiosity breaking through her fatigue. "Why isn't Rickon here?" "Rickon will be told eventually," Father answered. When everyone was seated, he folded his hand in front of him and had a look on his face, which Jon knew well. He was going to have a hard conversation. "It's time you," he said, looking at Lady Stark, "and Arya know the truth about Jon's birth." Lady Stark sat up a little. "Don't you think this is a conversation that should be had without Arya?" "I want to know," Arya chimed in. "Jon's my brother." Jon leaned back in his chair, neglecting to join the conversation. He had no problem with Arya knowing the same way he had no problem with Robb knowing. His birth, he knew, wouldn't change the relationship they had. They were still family. "Jon, this is your story," Father said, forcing Jon into the discussion. Jon looked at Arya before looking at Lady Stark. "My lady, I understand your feelings. All I can say is that I believe Arya is old enough to hear it." "I don't need you all protecting me," Arya grumbled. Jon shot her a look to be quiet before addressing Lady Stark again. If it helps, there are parts of the story that will need to be told differently. I will change them. Lady Stark gazed at Jon for a long moment before finally nodding. Very well, go on. Jon nodded and took a moment to collect his thoughts. He glanced at his father, who simply nodded back at him. The message was clear. This was Jon's tale to tell. He could take as much time as he needed. I should say first that this story must stay between us. Jon started. There are only 3 other men who know, that is Robb, Samwell Tarly, and Howland Reed. Why? Arya asked, unable to help herself. Because it could put Jon and a lot of other people in danger. Father said seriously. No more questions until after Jon is done. Arya, hearing the tone of his voice, nodded quietly. I am tempted to start at the beginning, Jon said, but I will tell you the truth here, and now, before explaining the events that led up to it. What is the truth? Lady Stark asked quietly. Looking between Jon and father, I am the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. Jon said softly. He wasn't looking at Lady Stark, or Arya, or father. He was staring down at the tabletop. It started at the tourney of Harrenhal. Rhaegar saw something in Lyanna. He was obsessed with a prophecy about a prince that would save the world from a great darkness, and that prince would sing a song of ice and fire. He also believed that the dragon must have 3 heads. Since his wife Elia Martell nearly died with their second child, he thought that Lyanna was the missing piece he needed. I'm not sure what he was thinking, but that's the best way I can explain it. The cabin was entirely silent, and Jon refused to look up. He wasn't sure why, but he refused to look up. He continued in the same soft tone that he had started the story in. He convinced Lyanna to run away with him. Perhaps she saw it as a way to escape her marriage with Robert Baratheon, or perhaps it was something else. But she went with Rodrigo to the Tower of Joy in Dorne. Things went south when Lyanna heard of her family's death in King's Landing, Jon explained, careful not to outright mention the murder of Lady Stark's former betrothed. He took a deep breath before going on. She wanted to leave, and Rodrigo wouldn't let her. Howland said that he knew that he was too far gone, that he was too invested in the prophecy. Forced himself on her and got her with child. Jon stopped after that, breathing slow. He wasn't sure why he was having a hard time telling the story, but when he felt his father's hand on his shoulder, he kept going, determined to finish the tale.
The war happened, and Rhaegar left her at the tower to fight Robert.
Jon continued. As you know, father went south with his men and fought the 3 Kingsguard who guarded Lyanna, Gerald Hightower, Oel Wend, and Arthur Dane. When he found Lyanna, she had just given birth and was dying. She asked him to name him. Name me, to give me an honorable name. He chose Jon, after Jon Arryn. Why? Lady Stark asked. She had stayed silent the entire time Jon spoke, and even though he wasn't looking at her, he knew that the question wasn't for him. He was Rhaegar's son, father said. They were all speaking in quiet voices. Serious conversations had that effect on people. I was afraid of what Robert would do, and if not him, Tywin. You never told me, Lady Stark said, sounding hurt. I never told anyone, father responded. The only ones who knew were myself and Howland, and I was content to bring that to my grave if it meant that Jon was safe. What does this mean? Arya asked. Is Jon still my brother? Yes, Jon said instantly, looking up for the first time. Arya looked to be holding back tears, while Lady Stark looked both hurt and sad. Father just had that same grim look that he had when he had told Jon to tell the story. I do not acknowledge Rhaegar as my true father. I don't know him, and he did not raise me. Jon explained. My father is Eddard Stark. So what does that make you? Arya asked. Is Aunt Lyanna still your mother? Jon thought for a moment before answering. Rhaegar and Lyanna are still my parents. Arya, but I do not and will not call them such. Father is my father, because he raised me as his son. Does that make sense? Arya nodded slowly. So you're still my brother. Jon smiled slightly. Yes, I am still your brother. While Jon and Arya spoke, Lady Stark began to cry softly and she was unable to look in Jon's direction. Both Jon and father noticed this.
Arya, go wash.
Father ordered. And remember what Jon said. You cannot talk about this with anyone. Not even Syrio, Arya asked. Not even Syrio, father said. Remember, Something like this. It put a lot of people in danger.
How?
Arya asked. For how mature and perceptive Arya was, there were still things that she didn't fully understand. People will try and kill me, Jon said quietly, feeling like honesty was the best answer. This is information that can cause a lot of people to get angry and to fight and die stupidly. Me and Robb and Father and others included. Arya nodded. Okay.
Thank you, Father said. Now go and wash.
When Arya left, Jon, Lady Stark, and Father remained where they were, waiting. Jon wasn't sure what to say. He had spoken his piece, and Lady Stark had reacted how she did. But Father had sent Arya away for a reason, and now Jon just had to wait and find out why. I'm sorry, Lady Stark said finally. I'm so sorry. Jon nodded awkwardly. It's okay, my lady, he responded gently. You didn't know. I was terrible to you, Lady Stark sobbed. All because she didn't finish her sentence. Choking up, Jon nodded again. I understand. I'm also sorry, Father said, looking at his wife. I should have told you sooner. Jon was now caught in the middle of something he didn't know how to dissect himself from. After another minute of listening to Lady Stark cry and Father's sad presence beside him, he decided to bring the matter to a head. He had a decent idea of why Lady Stark was angry. My lady, Jon said, you don't have to be sorry. You didn't know and I don't hold any ill feelings towards you. But I admitted that I hated you, Lady Stark said, looking at Jon through tearful eyes. I looked in your eye and told you. Jon nodded slowly. You did, and I still don't blame you. How? Lady Stark asked. Jon hesitated before shaking his head. I'm not sure. You said that you couldn't find it within yourself to like me. I can't find it within myself to hate you. I wish I had a better answer. Thank you, Lady Stark sniffed. Jon nodded, getting up from his seat. My lady, Father, he said, bowing slightly to them both, before striding out. Robb read over the treaty, mentally noting down areas that would need to be changed. Varys, with the help of Prince Doran and Adrian Celtigar, had done a good job coming up with terms and compromises that would benefit both parties. But Robb could also see Aegon's and Dany's hand in the writing as well. After Robb was done reading, he handed the document to Willis. The new Lord of Highgarden was just as intelligent as his sister, and Robb thanked the gods that he was by his side, while Marguerite was still recovering. He was by far the perfect person to have in this situation. Not bad, Robb mused. There are a few mistakes that I must point out. However, mistakes? Aegon asked, a slight edge in his voice. It was obvious that he was trying not to insult Robb whenever the two were near each other, but there was something about Robb that seemed to bring out the worst in the Targaryen king. Robb had no doubt that it was his family name and the crown he wore. Indeed, Robb nodded. First, Maidenpool is not part of the Crownlands, it's part of the Riverlands. House Moten are bannermen of the Tullys of Riverrun, not the Iron Throne. But the city is in the Crownlands, Aegon protested. Antlers and Rook's Rest practically mark where the edge of the Crownlands are, Robb responded calmly. Maidenpool is north of them. This is just a power grab, Stark, Aegon huffed. Robb shrugged. If you wish to call facts a power grab, then so be it. But grab any books regarding the houses of Westeros and you'll see that I'm right. The two kings gazed at each other. Aegon looked like he wanted to say something, but he also was afraid of being proven wrong, so he continued to glare. Robb simply gazed back, not intimidated in the slightest. The boy was wrong, and Robb would make sure he knew. What other amendments would you suggest? Donnie asked, switching the subject. I would like a note in there about your dragons, Robb commented. I saw that there was nothing in the treaty about them. What about them? Aegon snapped. I would like them to be kept on a chain, Robb said, holding up a hand before Dante could respond. Not a literal one. I would like their, let's call it territory, to remain inside the Crownlands. They're dragons, Aegon argued. They fly where they want. Robb shook his head. I'm afraid I can't allow that. See, if they attack a village in my lands, then I will ensure that they are put down. Aegon looked ready to jump to his feet. You have no right. Robb raised an eyebrow. If my direwolf attacked one of your men, you would call for his death, wouldn't you? It's a wild animal, Stark, Aegon snarled. Dany shifted uncomfortably next her betrothed. Robb smiled thinly at the other man. I wouldn't call your betrothed's children wild animals, my lord, Robb said easily, leaning forward. But since you did, here is the law of the land. As king, I can hunt any wild animal in my territory. They are not wild, Dany said, defending the beasts. No, I do not believe they are, Robb said, leaning back. But even still, I must insist that a leash is kept on them, for the safety of my own people. What else? Aegon snarled. Robb glanced at Willis, who nodded in return. He set down the treaty carefully and folded his hands in front of him. As His Grace said, there are many good points in here. The currency remaining the same is good, as is trade throughout Westeros. I believe that keeping Westeros united even with two ruling families is a priority we should all keep in mind. Willis started, however. It seems that you have demanded that a road be built through the Stormlands and into Dorne. What's the problem with that? Dany asked. They are our allies. Willis nodded, conceding the point. Indeed, but perhaps that is a project that is better done after the two kingdoms are united. Aegon muttered something under his breath that sounded very close to breaking the treaty, but when he noticed that everyone else was looking at him, he shut his mouth and shook his head, going back to his pouting. Dany thought for a moment before nodding. Very well. You have also added in there that you wish for House Stark to help with the crown's debt, Willis said. Why is that? Aside from Potter Baelish's crimes, Robert Baratheon was still responsible for plunging the realm into debt. Varys explained. With the money taken from Baelish, we have been able to pay off the faith, but there is still the Lannisters, Tyrells, and the Iron Bank. So Robert borrowed money from the Tyrells and Lannisters, and now you are asking that those people help pay off the debt, Robb asked. You understand how confusing that sounds. Perhaps pay off is not the right word, Prince Doran said, coming into the conversation. Cancel the debts, Aegon said flatly. They are the usurpers' problems. Willis shook his head. I'm afraid that they are the Iron Throne's problems. Robert Baratheon plunged the realm into debt, Dany said. That is not our fault. No, but it is now your problem, Willis said. I'm sure the Iron Bank sees it as such. Unfortunately so, Varys confirmed. Robb sighed. We will not cancel the debts owed, but we will allow you to first pay off the debt owed to the Iron Bank before turning to House Lannister and House Tyrell. That is kind of you, my lord, Varys said. I still don't see why we should owe House Lannister anything, Aegon grumbled. Since the Lannisters still have control of Casterly Rock, I'm sure Tyrion Lannister would very much like to see that money returned to his family, Robb said. Aegon gave Robb a murderous glare. The imp, his sellsword, and his squire had been handed over to Robb at the beginning of the meeting, and were currently outside under the guard of Brienne, Clegane, Dacey, and Garlan, 4 of Robb's best warriors. Tommen Waters was with them as well, but he was accompanied by his sister Myrcella, along with her betrothed, and 2 of the Sand Snakes, Oberyn Martell's bastard daughters. That group would accompany Robb until they reached the neutral zone between the two forces, where Myrcella would say goodbye to Tommen. Is there anything else you'd like to take, Stark? Aegon asked. Robb raised an eyebrow, ignoring the baited question. Not at the moment, Willis. The Lord of Highgarden shook his head. Varys smiled. Then it seems things are in order. Prince Doran, Lord Celtigar, and I shall work on a revision and will send a rider when it is done. Send a copy to my camp, Robb said with a wave of his hand. My counselors and I shall go over it there and will send back any notes. I believe that will be much faster than these meetings. Couldn't agree more, Aegon grunted. Lord Stark, I would like to ask a favor. Dany said, stopping Robb from getting up. Yes, Robb asked. I would very much like to speak with your father, Lord Eddard, when he arrives. Dany said. Eddard Stark is coming south, Aegon asked. Clearly this was the first he was hearing of it. May I ask why? Robb asked, addressing Dany. I would like to hear from him about the war. Dany replied calmly. Robb thought for a moment. I will speak to him about a possible meeting when he arrives. If he agrees, then I shall have a tent set up on neutral ground. I am not fond of the idea of sending him into King's Landing. Why's that? Aegon snapped. Bad memories, Robb said coldly, getting up fully from his chair. He nodded to Dany and Aegon. Good day, my lady. My lord. When Robb and Willis left the room, Willis glanced over his shoulder at the room, waiting till they were a good distance before he spoke. That went well, he commented. Would have gone better if Edain wasn't a prat. Robb grunted quietly. Marjorie did say that he was tough to be around, Willis said. Tough is giving the boy more credit than he deserves. Robb sighed. He's my only worry about this whole damn treaty. Truly, Willis asked. Once a family burns yours, you tend to be skeptical until proven wrong. Robb said grimly. Dany has proven to me that she is fine. Aegon has done fuck all. Robb and Willis finally reached the large group, waiting for them. Tyrion and his companions had their hands bound in front of them, while Tommen held onto his sister's hand, looking a little frightened of Robb. Brienne, Dacey, and Garland bowed when Robb approached. Clegane just nodded. Robb gazed at the Dornish party. My lady, he said, greeting Marcella. The boy next to her looked a little younger than Robb, with straight black hair and olive skin. He was dressed in exquisite yellow silks, with a fine orange cape that bore a gold spear piercing a red sun. Trystane Martell, my lord, he said with a boy. Pleasure, Robb said, before moving on to the two women behind the couple. The first woman was big-boned and looked to be around 30, with rat-brown hair and close-set eyes. She wore leathers and handled a spear that looked similar to the one Oberyn Martell wielded, and had a shield slung across her back. She handled the spear with practiced ease. The second woman was slim and slender, with all the beauty that the other woman lacked. She wore a silken robe over a pair of riding breeches. Although Robb could not see any sign of a weapon, he had no doubt that she was just as deadly as the bigger woman. They were called sand snakes for a reason. Let's go, Robb ordered, striding ahead of them. The group followed the Northern King into the courtyard, where they all mounted individual mounts. The horses given to Podbron and Tyrion were dull, old and slow, that had no chances of running off, and their reins were held by one of Robb's guards. The three men had to be helped into their saddles, as their hands were still bound and later tied to their pommels. Strangely, none of them said anything about the cold treatment they were receiving from Robb and his men. The odd company easily made their way out of the city and rode north until they reached the spot where Robb and Dany had first met. It had become the unofficial neutral zone between the two ruling couples. It had been where Sansa had been given back to her family and also, coincidentally, where Robb and his commanders had first learned that the Targaryens had taken the city. It was here where Myrcella was forced to part ways with Tommen. Robb watched patiently as the brother and sister said their goodbyes with the usual promise to see each other again. Robb was in no rush and didn't want to tear apart the already sad moment between brother and sister by forcing their goodbyes. I am rather surprised the Targaryens allowed Tommen out of their grasp so easily, Welles said quietly.
Marjorie believes that it might have to do with the faith, Robb answered. They certainly don't support the Targaryens, nor will they support me, a tree-worshipping pagan.
By that logic, why would they support Tommen or Myrcella? Welles asked. Stannis outed the incestuous relationship between the Kingslayer and Cersei. The faith doesn't believe a word, Stannis said. Robb answered, not since he's a fire worshipper or whatever they bloody called him. So they think Tommen and Myrcella are the children of Robert and Cersei, Welles asked. Robb considered the question for a moment before shaking his head. No, I don't think so. I believe, after meeting the new High Septon, or High Sparrow, as he is also known, that he believes that he can manipulate Tommen, or Myrcella. He hides his ambition behind his piety. In other words, you took the boy out of the city so that way he doesn't get caught up in the power struggle between the Faith and the Targaryens, Willis said. Essentially, Robb said. When Tommen and Myrcella said their goodbyes, the Dornish party began to trot back towards the capital. Robb followed their example and turned his horse around so that it was pointed towards his own camp. A line break. Robb sat alone in the main chamber of his tent. There was no table in front of him or a desk, just 3 chairs. Grey Wind sat next to him, one of the few times that the giant direwolf was with him. Most of the time, Grey Wind stayed close to Margaery and Torrhen, which Robb was more than fine with. There were few others Robb trusted more than Grey Wind. Brienne opened up the flap to the tent and ushered the 3 men in. They were led by a stunted figure with mostly blonde hair and mixed-matched eyes of green and black. He had golden stubble covering his jaw. He certainly didn't carry himself like he was a prisoner. Actually, he seemed to have all the confidence in the world, and the innocent, almost carefree smile on his face showed it. The other two men behind him were as different as could be. One was obviously a sellsword, given his rough-and-ready appearance and hard features. The boy looked like his own shadow could scare him. All three still had their wrists bound and had been thoroughly checked for weapons. When they took their seats in front of Robb with the imp sitting in the middle, Brienne strode in and took up a position at the entrance with one hand ready to draw her sword. "Lord Tyrion," Robb said, keeping his voice neutral. Tyrion looked Robb up and down before responding with a tilt of his misshapen head. "Your Grace, I have to thank you for my rescue."
Don't thank me.
Robb grunted. "Wasn't my idea." "Ah," Tyrion sighed. "So it was Lady Sansa who had me released." "She vouched for you," Robb said. "She is the main reason why you are not currently in the Black Cells. She said that you protect her from Joffrey." "Yes, my nephew had a horrible sense of justice." Tyrion mused. "Your dead nephew," Robb corrected. "Same with your sister." Tyrion nodded, not looking all that surprised. "I figured that they would meet their ends sooner or later. Did they die well?" "What do you think?" Tyrion grunted. "So no then. You don't seem all that sad that they're gone." Robb noted. "And I'm not." Tyrion agreed. "Cersei's always hated me and Joffrey was the Mad King. Come again." "I hear you practically saved the city from going up in flames," Robb said. "Joffrey seemed to enjoy driving it into the ground." "No offense, but it would have been a lot easier without your raiders led by the Onion Knight," Tyrion replied. "Well, it also didn't help that you married the girl whose family rules the region with all the food." "Alliances and hindering your enemy is the nature of war," Robb countered. "Your father knew that when he turned the Freys and the Boltons against me." Tyrion nodded. "Quite right, you surprised us all. I should add, I've never seen my father worked up like when he heard about how you captured Aemma. Of course, outsmarting him with that little ploy of drums and banners helped." "I did what I had to," Robb said. "Indeed," Tyrion mused. "After spending a few months in your frozen homeland, I find that being direct is usually the best way to talk to people."
It is.
Robb agreed, still keeping his voice neutral. "It is nice and all that your sister repaid the kindness that I showed her," Tyrion said. "Now that begs the question, what do you plan to do with me now?" Robb shrugged. "I haven't decided yet. I suppose that's better than getting my head taken off." Tyrion grunted. "Your mother tried hard to make that happen." "I'm aware," Robb said. "She blamed you for attempting to murder my brother. That has been revealed as a lie told to her by Baelish." Tyrion snorted derisively. "Why am I not surprised? What, if you don't mind me asking, has happened to the man?" "He had his head chopped off along with Joffrey and Cersei for the part he played in starting the war," Robb answered. "I suppose he did do that," Tyrion said. "I must say Varys must be very pleased with that. I'm not sure how the spider felt about me, but I am quite certain he was not a fan of Littlefinger. He's the one who exposed Baelish's lies," Robb replied. "As for you and that part you might have played in Bran's attempted murder, I agreed with my mother up until you returned to Winterfell and gifted my brother a chance to ride and move around again." Tyrion smiled slightly. "I didn't know if you remembered that little event. I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples and bastards and broken things," Robb said, quoting the imp. "As I said, I do not have plans for you at this moment, but I will tell you here and now that I do not trust you." "I didn't expect you to," Tyrion agreed. "So give me my sentence. You and your friends shall be watched and guarded day and night." Robb said, "You will not be allowed weapons and you will be checked after eating for knives. You will have limited freedom of the camp. The Northmen who followed me south surround this tent. You will go no further than their tents." "So we're not prisoners, but we still have no freedom," Tyrion summarized. "Would you prefer cells?" Robb asked with a raised eyebrow. Tyrion shook his head. "Give me books and wine and I shall be a model whatever it is. I am." Robb gazed at Tyrion before nodding slowly. "That can be arranged." Tyrion gave Robb a brilliant smile. "Perfect." Robb nodded towards the exit. "You may go." Bronn and Pod got up and began to walk towards the exit. Tyrion hopped out of his seat, then seemed to think of something. He lost his smile and replaced it with a thoughtful expression. "May I speak with Sansa?" Robb considered the question before nodding. "I will ask her if she would like to meet with you." "Thank you, my lord," Tyrion said with a bow. "I remember those who show me kindness. A Lannister pays his debts." Robb responded, quoting the well-known Lannister words. Know this, Lord Tyrion, that if you cross me or overstep your place, I will show you that Starks pay theirs as well. Tyrion stared at Robb as if he was looking at him for the first time. I always wondered how you managed to stay one step ahead of my father. I always considered it to be luck. Maybe. Just maybe. Without finishing his sentence, Tyrion waddled out of the tent, giving a respectful nod to Brienne on his way out. Robb? Robb paced back and forth in his tent, staring at the floor. Greywind and Margaery watched him walk back and forth. Torrhen slept soundly on his mother's shoulder. The maesters had been monitoring both the babe and Margaery for the past few days, making sure that there were no dangers that followed the birth. But both mother and son were healthy and strong. Robb still worried about his wife and son, as all good husbands and fathers do, but currently he could only think of the family who would be arriving any second. A rider bearing the sigil of a white rose had arrived that morning, saying that father and the rest of his family were not far away. Seri Davos, who had fled to White Harbor when the Targaryens arrived, had helped bring Robb's family and the company of the Rose from the north and let them off at Maidenpool, where it was just a short ride to Robb's camp. Sansa entered the tent, followed by Sir Brendan and Edmure. They haven't arrived? Sansa asked, looking around as if they might appear. Robb shook his head. They're supposed to be here any second, he answered distractedly. Robb had no idea what he was going to say when he saw his family again. With Sansa and Jon, Robb had hugged them and they had exchanged stories. Sansa's stories had led her to sobbing on Robb's shoulder, while Jon's story had led to the revelation that he was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. But Robb had always known that they were alive. Robb had mourned his father. Jon was by his side when he did so. He had accepted his father's death and had embraced his role as king in the north. Now he had no idea what to think, not with his father so close. The rules of Westeros were fairly clear on the matter. With Robb's father still alive, the crown should rightly be his, not Robb's. Then there was also the thought that father wouldn't want Robb to be king, for whatever reason that might be. Then Robb would be stuck between obeying his father and doing right by all those who had knelt before him and pledged their loyalty to him and the crown he wore. The thunderous sound of hoofbeats broke Robb's train of thoughts. Sansa clapped her hands together and already had tears springing up in her eyes. Sir Brendan, in a surprising show of affection, put his arm around the young girl. Edmure had a beaming smile on his face. Robb glanced at Margaery, showing his fear and uncertainty in the single look. His wife nodded gently towards him and had a kind, sweet smile on her face. It spoke volumes to the Northern King as he felt the block of anxiety slowly melt away. He straightened up and tugged his jerkin straight, laying an easy hand on Claw. In a matter of moments, he had gone from Robb Stark, the heir of Winterfell, to King Robb Stark, king in the north, ruler of 6 of the 7 kingdoms. He had become the young wolf. The tent flap was pushed back by Brienne to reveal his father, looking no different than Robb had last seen him. He still wore a plain plated leather jerkin, but this time he had ice slung across his back. His mother, dressed in a beautiful blue and white dress, had her hair done up in her normal bun. They looked no different than they always did when the family was all together in Winterfell. Rickon and Arya were right behind them. Arya was dressed in a jerkin and breeches, and had a slim sword at her waist, but she was grinning happily when she caught sight of Robb. Rickon, who was holding her hand, looked confused, but his face soon lit up as well when he saw Robb and Sansa. Jon was the last to enter, wearing black plated leather with Frost by his side. 2 direwolves padded in silently behind the group. Father stopped just short of Robb, straightening to his full height before going into a deep bow. Before he could finish, Robb had crossed the distance between them and threw his arms around his father, who quickly responded in kind. Mother soon joined in the hug, pulling Sansa in with her, who had tears of joy running down her face. Arya and Rickon were around Robb's legs, and he pulled them towards the middle. Soon, almost the entire Stark family, after more than a year of being apart, was together once again. Robb looked up, his eyes rimmed red with unshed tears. Saw Jon waiting at the back. The 2 brothers locked eyes and shared a laugh before Robb pulled Jon's head towards his. The 2 brothers putting their heads together, both laughing softly and holding back tears. Finally, after a few minutes of holding each other tight, the group broke, no one quite sure where to begin. Robb still wasn't sure what the hell to say. Even when Marguerite had broken the news to him that his father was alive, he hadn't prepared for seeing him again. "Father?" Robb said weakly. Father put a hand on Robb's shoulder. The smile on his face spoke volumes to the young king, as did the look of immense pride and love in his eyes. "Robb," Father said quietly, "I'm so proud of you, and all that you have done. Words cannot describe." Robb opened his mouth to respond, but when nothing came out, he shut it. He had no response to his father's words, as no words were capable of explaining all the emotions that he was feeling. His mother put her hand on his cheek, running a hand through his coarse beard. "You boy, my beautiful boy," Mother said, tears dripping down her cheeks. Robb grabbed his mother's hand gently, smiling at her. He glanced behind him and saw Marguerite watching the family reunion with joyful expression, tears of her own appearing in her eyes. Robb let go of his mother's hand and reached out for hers, drawing Marguerite to his side. "Father, Mother, this is Marguerite, my wife," Robb said proudly, wrapping an arm around Marguerite's waist. "And Torrhen, my son." Father smiled kindly at Marguerite. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, good daughter." Mother could only bow slightly as she wrapped one arm around Father's. Marguerite bowed slightly to them both. "It's an honor to meet you as well," Marguerite said happily. "Robb has only spoken praises of you both, and the rest of his family as well." Marguerite looked at Mother. "Would you like to hold your grandson?" Captain sniffled happily and nodded, gently taking the sleeping child from Marguerite as Arya came forward. Father had moved on to hugging Sansa, who was still sobbing. Robb knelt down till he was about the same height as Arya. The two siblings smiled wildly as Arya threw herself at Robb, just as she had when she and Jon had been reunited. When Arya stepped back, Robb looked at her clothing. "So, Mother finally allowed you to wear breeches," he chuckled. "Nice sword." Arya drew the weapon proudly, holding it in both hands. "Jon had it made for me before I left." "Does it have a name?" "Needle," Arya stated happily. Robb grinned and drew his own sword. "This is Claw." Arya laughed as she sheathed her sword, Robb doing the same. That's when Rickon came flying at Robb, grabbing his beard and face before finally throwing his arms around Robb's neck. Robb laughed and lifted his youngest brother off his feet, holding him tight. It had been so long since he had seen Rickon. His hair was long and wild, but Robb was just happy that he had recognized him. Robb put his little brother down and turned slightly. Marguerite was speaking happily with Jon when she caught Robb's gaze. "Arya, Rickon, this is Marguerite, my wife," Robb said, introducing them. Marguerite crouched down next to Robb, smiling kindly at the other Starks. Rickon looked a little shy, while Arya looked skeptical. "You must be Arya," Marguerite said. "You look just how Robb said you would." "Oh?" Arya said. "You mean like my Aunt Lyanna?" "She was said to be very beautiful," Marguerite agreed. "But you also look like the Ara I've heard about. Strong and fierce, and no doubt a great fighter." "How do you know that?" Arya asked. Marguerite shrugged casually. "Two of my brothers are great warriors. I know one when I see one. I'm going to be the first Sword of Braavos someday," Arya said firmly. "I have no doubt," Marguerite agreed, sounding completely genuine. "And this must be Rickon." The youngest Stark nodded quickly, looking like he was trying to hide behind Arya. Marga smiled at the boy and held out a hand to him. Perhaps it was the smile on Marga's face which is very hard to say no to, or maybe it was the fact that she was a mother, but Rickon hesitantly took Marga's hand, allowing himself to be drawn out from behind Arya. "I'm Marguerite," Marguerite said simply. "Hi," Rickon said hesitantly. Marguerite laughed and ruffled Rickon's long auburn curls. Rickon couldn't help but laugh himself before disappearing behind Arya again. Robb got to his feet, looking around the tent as Arya and Marguerite continued to talk about Arya's hopes and dreams in Essos. Father and Mother, who was still holding Torrhen, were talking with Edmure and Ser Brendan, both Tullys looking happy to see Mother and Father again. Rickon had somehow raced across the room to Sansa. "This is good," Jon said quietly, appearing at Robb's side. The two brothers embraced properly, this time, laughing and clapping each other on the shoulder and back. "It's good to have you back with me, Jon," Robb said happily. "This is how it should always be." "You'll always have me with you, Robb," Jon said, clapping Robb on the shoulder. "We're brothers, we'll never abandon each other." Robb glanced at the others and pulled Jon towards the back of the tent, where Greywind, Ghost, and Shaggy Dog were nipping and playing with each other, obviously very happy to be back together once again. All three direwolves were massive, yet they played like puppies. "Where's Bran?" Robb asked, trying to keep a pleasant expression on his face so as to not worry anyone. Jon glanced at the others before copying Robb's expression. He and Lord Reed's children fled north, apparently to go north of the Wall. Jon responded, "Word has already been sent to Castle Black, but it's been months. They disappeared a few days after Winterfell was burned." "Why would Bran need to go north of the Wall?" Robb asked. Jon shook his head. "Another time, Robb, it's a long story. He's not alone, however. Howland's children, along with Hodor and Summer, are with him." Robb sighed. "At least he's not alone." "We'll find him," Jon promised. "Even if I have to go north of the Wall myself, we'll find them and bring them home." Robb smiled thankfully at his brother. "Thank you."
Line break.
The feast that night was filled with even more greetings as Father reunited with all his former friends. Yoan Royce and Jason Mollister were two of the first men to greet Father, followed by Jonas Bracken, Titus Blackwood, Horton Redford, and Bryce Caron, all men who had fought together during Robert's Rebellion and the Greyjoy Rebellion. Many men continued to approach him throughout the feast, greeting him simply based on reputation. Robb sat in the middle of the high table, with his family to his right, starting with his father and mother, and Margaery and her family to Robb's left. The night was full of laughs and cheers. Many lords of the Riverlands approached Jon and commended him for his campaign in the north. One table that began to slowly join the festivities belonged to the captains of the Company of the Rose. Robb had briefly met their leader, Darren, and had offered him a seat at the high table because he was a Stark. His cousin had politely declined the offer, stating that he wanted to feast with his men. Darren was now engaged in a conversation with Royce, Tarly, and Sir Brynden, the four men getting along surprisingly well. All four had illustrious military backgrounds, which helped forge a common bond between them. As the feast progressed, seats changed with more frequency. Margaery was sitting beside Mother, the two talking about motherhood, and some things that Margaery should expect as Torrhen grew up. Sansa sat next to Olenna, talking about something Robb couldn't hear. Willis spoke quietly with Jon, while Garland spoke with Arya. Arya's dancing master was deep in conversation with Loras Tyrell. Apparently he was a master swordsman who had served the ruler of Braavos for many years. The Lords of the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Riverlands, and the captain of the Company of the Rose spoke together like old friends. And it made Robb extremely happy to see his men behaving in such a way. Robb felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see his father. Last Robb saw, he had been speaking with Gregor Forrester. "Perhaps we should talk," Father said quietly, privately. Robb nodded and got up, making his way over to Margaery. He kissed her on the top of her head. "I'll be back," he promised. Margaery looked over her shoulder at Robb, noticing her good father behind him. She knew that whatever was happening, it was between father and son. She smiled and gave Robb a light kiss before going back to her conversation with Mother. Robb and Father quickly made their way out of the feasting tent, past the fires of the northern troops, greeting men as they passed. The Northmen were extremely proud of Robb and fought bravely for him, but they equally loved his father and would walk into hell and back for him. They couldn't be happier to see father and son together again. Brienne followed the two Starks from a distance. She had ensured that there were guards in place for Robb's and others' protection, and had insisted on standing guard herself, while the rest of the elite unit under her command shed their armor and mingled with the rest of the nobles. When Robb and his father were in the privacy of the command tent, with Brienne taking up her position just inside the entrance, Robb grabbed 2 tankards of ale from inside his quarters, while his father pulled 2 chairs close to each other. It wasn't planned, but both men seemed to think that ale was the best drink for the following conversation. Whatever it may be. Robb handed his father a tankard as he took his seat, letting out a quiet sigh now that he was back in the confines of his own tent and away from the feast. Robb enjoyed socializing with his lords, but with the war and the treaty taking up so much of his time, he rarely had time alone with Margaery, let alone himself. "The crown suits you," Father said, taking a sip of the ale. "Edmure told me that the smith at Riverrun had fashioned it after the crown Tyrion Stark wore." Robb nodded, pulling the circlet of bronze and black iron from his head, admiring it. "It seems right," he said, before setting it back on his head. "Although some would argue that it belongs to you." Father nodded slowly. Aye, that's true, he said before looking Robb in the eye. But I don't want it. Robb nodded as well. So where does that leave us? Father leaned back in his chair, cradling his tankard in both hands. Robb, I have my doubts about this, he said, gesturing to the crown. Not because I think you can't handle the crown, you've proven beyond all doubts that you can, but because I know what the throne can do to people. You mean what it did to Robert Baratheon? Robb said. Father nodded. Robert was not the man I knew, and seeing him ride into Winterfell, I knew it as soon as I saw him. I don't want to see you become that, Robb. I don't want to see you become bitter and resentful. Robert was a horrible king who abused his position with tourneys and feasts, and as much as it hurts to me to say such, it's the truth. I know, Father, Robb answered. The crown is a burden to bear, not a reward. You taught me that as Lord of Winterfell. I had a duty to my people. Robb paused for a moment. Now I have a duty to protect and serve the people in all the regions that are under my protection. Father looked at Robb for a long time before responding. You'll be a good king, Robb. You're thriving in the south far more than I ever could. Robb smiled slightly. Margaery has quite a bit to do with that. Father smiled as well. Aye, she's a true prodigy of her grandmother, that's for sure. You were smart to marry her. Father's smile fell. Now, before you tell me about this treaty you're working on, I would like for you to answer me one question. Of course, Robb said. Do they truly have dragons? 3 of them, a little bigger than horses. Robb confirmed. How'd you know? Darren had told me when the Targaryen girl started rallying men to her banner in Pentos. Father responded, running a hand through his hair. What are the Targaryens like?
Daenerys is good, Robb replied.
She's quickly catching on to the customs of Westeros, and although she was never told the truth about her father and the rebellion, I think she's accepted what's happened. Father raised an eyebrow. Truly? Robb nodded. I think so. She has a good heart and wants to help people. She freed 8,000 slave soldiers, Father. She also has Sir Barristan Selmy, advising her. Barristan? Father asked. I wonder how he came to her. Robb shook his head. I don't know, but I believe I can work with her. It's the other one that I don't trust. What other one? Father asked. I know of the girl Robert wanted her dead after she married some Dothraki horselord. Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar's son, Robb explained. Apparently he didn't die and was smuggled out, replaced I assume, with another child. Where's he been this entire time? Jon Connington has been raising him, Robb answered. Why is he the problem? He's arrogant and headstrong. Robb grunted. He's an ass, to put it simply. He's grudgingly agreed with everything concerning peace, after questioning my every word. Does he want war? Father asked. I think he does, Robb answered grimly. He believes that all of Westeros belongs to him. Is he mad? Father asked, asking the question slowly and carefully. It was an important question, especially given the last Targaryen king. I think he may become so, Robb answered, in the same tone. I can never turn my back on him. The entire peace treaty is grounded in the understanding between Daenerys and I. And what understanding is that?
I don't want to lead my men into more war,
Robb answered honestly. I fought Tywin. Lord Turley is still working on taking Casterly Rock. Jon and you retook the north. The last thing I want to do is lead my men against usse and Dornishan dragons. And the girl? I think she's afraid of being seen as an invader, Robb said. She knows that her family has been away from Westeros, and it did not leave the best legacy when it was forced out. That's true, Father grunted. Well, if you think peace is the best option, then I have no objections. Really? Robb asked, the question coming out before he could stop himself. Father nodded. You're your own man, Robb. You're a father, a husband, a king. What you've built, what you've fought for, you did it all by yourself. Even with all that happened in the north, you still won. You are not a boy, and I will not treat you as such. You are my son, and you are also my king. If you think peace is what is best, then I support your decision. Robb took a moment to process his father's honest and open declaration. Not only was Robb being acknowledged as the king by his father, but he also had that sign of approval that all sons wish from their fathers, and understanding that they can now make decisions without looking to their parents to see if it was the right one. Robb had been trying to fill the void his father had left since his false execution, and now his father was saying that he had done just that. "The Targaryens would like to meet with you," Robb said after draining his ale. I assumed they would," father said grimly. "I'm the last remaining member of the rebellion. Robert, Jon, Hoster, even Tywin, they're all dead and gone." "I won't let you go into the city," Robb said. "The tent will be set up in the neutral ground." "Very well," father agreed, draining the last of his own ale before standing. "Come on, I'm sure your wife misses you." Robb laughed and stood. As the two men walked towards the entrance, father stopped and turned towards Robb, putting a hand on his shoulder, just as he had when they had seen each other for the first time earlier that day. "I meant what I said, Robb," father said quietly. "I told Jon as well. You two have made me proud beyond words. The men you have become." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Robb knew what he meant. Robb smiled softly. "We learned from the best." Cunnington. The hand of the king sat behind his desk, reading over a report detailing another dispute between the Company of the Cat and the Windblown. The two sellsword companies have a lot of bad blood between them, and since there was no war to keep them occupied, there were arguments and fights multiple times a day. Connington could only throw so much women and food at the sellswords, trying to keep them complacent. He was all going to hell. He had planned for years with Varys and the Dornish, waiting impatiently for the time for him and the boy to return to Westeros. Then, when Varys finally said that it was time, Connington's plans went from good to great with the betrothment between Aegon and Daenerys. He had the sellswords, she had the dragons, and the Unsullied. He was perfect. Illyrio, the fat fool in Pentos, had paid for it all and even provided the ships needed for the army to cross the narrow sea. Connington knew that Robb Stark would be an obstacle to overcome. Varys had been keeping him and Prince Doran up to date with everything the boy was doing. It was impressive, but Connington had faith that when the time came, he would either bend the knee or be bathed in dragon fire. The plans that Connington had worked so hard on fell apart in small part due to Barristan Selmy, Varys, and Daenerys. They convinced the girl that peace was achievable with Stark, and unfortunately, they were proven right. That first meeting had been a disaster for the Targaryen party, especially for Aegon. Flashback. "Why wasn't I told?" Aegon demanded, storming into Connington's chambers. The young king's face was mottled with rage and betrayal. "What help would it have done?" Connington replied. "You're not Aerys." "I'm fucking related to him," Aegon snapped. "I had a right to know that my grandfather burned men alive. He was the king." Connington barked back. "Your grandfather was not without his faults, but you're not him." Aegon grabbed a nearby pitcher of wine and threw it against the wall, denting the pitcher and soaking a nearby table and chair in wine. His chest was heaving and he kept running a hand through his silvery blue hair. Connington simply took a seat behind his desk and waited for the boy. He had always had a temper, unlike his father. There were many differences between Aegon and Rhaegar, no doubt caused because of how they were raised. Rhaegar was raised as royalty, with everything he could ever want. He also benefited because of his friends in the Kingsguard, Ser Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy, men of honor and integrity. It also helped that Rhaegar was a naturally good person who excelled at anything and everything. His son, on the other hand, was headstrong and overconfident at the best of times. He had a problem controlling his emotions, but Connington was sure that the boy got that habit from being around sellswords most of his life, men who definitely had anger issues. But there were glimpses that proved that Aegon was indeed Rhaegar's son. Connington saw it in his smile and his eyes, the way he spoke. There was no doubt. Was he right? Aegon asked finally. "Stark?" Connington asked. "Aerys had problems, but they didn't warrant a rebellion. Your father should have replaced him as king." "Was he a rapist?" Aegon asked. "Did Rhaegar rape the Stark girl?" Connington scoffed. "Rhaegar was the furthest thing from a rapist, my boy. He was noble and true and as good a man as you'll ever find. Him raping Lyanna was a lie, concocted by Eddard Stark and the usurper. But he still ran off with another man's betrothed. Aegon the Conqueror had 2 wives. Whatever happened between them was nothing that would warrant a rebellion." Connington replied easily. Aegon nodded slightly, taking it all in. "You promised me Westeros," he said quietly, "and you'll have it." Connington said. Aegon shook his head. "Apparently my daughter will. married to Stark's son. Connaughton grunted. Worry not, my boy. His men will never agree to peace. Not when they're so close to victory. It also helps that Stark is young and will make mistakes all young men make. You're saying he'll declare war on us? Aegon said slowly. Continue nodded. He had no intention of telling the boy that Stark would declare war on the Targaryens because Connaughton provoked him. It was the only way to ensure that Westeros is returned to the rule of its true king. Daenerys would willingly sell her birthright away, but Connaughton had no intention of allowing Aegon to be stuck in the deal as well. Flashback. Connaughton was pulled from his thoughts by the knock at his door. Come. The door opened to reveal Lesson Omar, the Golden Company spy master. He was a sellsword like all the rest, but his skill set was much more suited to the job Connaughton had in mind for him. Any sellsword in the company could grab a random weapon and kill a man. Meyer had the ability to make the death look like an accident. Or not, depending on the message that needed to be sent. Lord Hand, Lysano said, bowing. Mar, Connaughton grunted. I have a job for you. Mar didn't respond, just allowing a slight smile to play on his lips. The spy master had a feminine appearance about him, with his hair and eyes giving him almost Targaryen characteristics. But the Lysani had the ability to change his looks depending on the situation. Robb Stark's guard is down. Connaughton continued. His child has been born, and his father has returned. I want him and his son dead. Lysano raised an eyebrow. Oh? Connaughton glared at the man. He's the linchpin. Pull it and the hierarchy falls to pieces. Lysano bowed again. I shall need. Connaughton waved his hand. Get whatever you need. Pilfer Pessel's stores, if you need. Word of this does not leave this room. Understood. Mar nodded and swept out of the room. The man was annoying to deal with, and reminded Connaughton of the Red Viper, but like all men in the Golden Company, he was very good at his job. Now all Connaughton had to do was wait. Once Stark and his son were dead, Ned Stark would look at the Targaryens as the obvious culprits. Connaughton loathed to label Aegon and Daenerys as child murderers, but it needed to be done. Tough decisions had to be made, and both Targaryens were too young to make such calls. What Connaughton was doing, it would bring about a much-needed war that would ensure that the Targaryens were once again in their rightful place as rulers of all Westeros. Varys' plan made them look weak and pathetic, making Daenerys and Aegon hand over a birthright that they should have been fighting for since the beginning. It didn't help that, even if the children of both couples were married, Starks would still rule Westeros. They had more land. They had all the advantages and leverage. House Targaryen would look like second place, and Connaughton would be damned if he let Rhaegar's house look second to the barbarians from the north. Once the war was won, and Aegon sat on the Iron Throne, no one would dare speak about how he got there. Not when he had earned his throne with fire and blood, just like his namesake. Jon Udisectioth. Jon's hand drifted towards his sword as he saw a large cloaked figure standing by his tent. The person was carrying a stout walking staff, and had a bulging satchel slung over one shoulder. From a distance they looked intimidating, but there was also something vaguely familiar. The person, a man most likely, seemed to be shuffling where he stood, as if he was uncomfortable or anxious. When he turned around, Jon's hand fell from his sword, and a smile spread across his face. Sam had changed slightly since the last time they saw each other. He was thinner, still big, but a lot of the fat had been lost. It was almost like a starved look. He still had stringy brown hair and had stubble covering his multiple chins. He had that same worried look on his face, like he was scared that he had done something wrong. But when he saw Jon, he immediately grinned. The two men embraced warmly. Jon was chuckling as he stepped back, holding Sam at arm's length. Sam, he said happily. What the blazes are you doing here? Ser Jon Fossoway asked me to accompany him. Sam explained. I helped defend the Citadel when the Ironborn invaded, and Ser Jon wanted me to be presented before the king. Jon raised an eyebrow. Ser Jon arrived a week ago. Sam nodded. I stopped at Bitterbridge. Lady Caswell had fallen ill, and the maester there couldn't find the answer in his books. Is she well? Jon asked. Sam nodded again. She had merely eaten some bad ham. I helped move the waste through her body, and she was better in a few days. Jon grinned. Let's have a drink. Jon and Sam ducked into Jon's tent, with Jon grabbing 2 tankards and pouring some watered ale into both. He handed one to Sam, who took it after setting aside his staff and satchel. Where's Ghost? Sam asked. Hunting, Jon answered. He'll return eventually. How big is he? Sam asked. I've heard rumors that the king's direwolf is as big as a pony. He's getting there. Jon agreed. Direwolves are magnificent creatures. Tell me about the Citadel. It must feel like home to you with all those books. Sam smiled. It's amazing, but as an acolyte, I was more of a servant to the other maesters and archmasters.
How many links have you forged?
Jon asked. Sam fished a small chain of 3 links from his satchel, handing it to Jon. All 3 links were iron, signifying warcraft. Jon raised an eyebrow, looking at his friend. Sam was the least violent person that Jon had ever met next to Sansa. How? I earned them protecting the Citadel, Sam explained. I was working on my silver and yellow gold links when the Ironborn attacked. Jon nodded slowly. How'd you survive? Sam sighed and hesitated before taking a long draught of ale. When he regained his breath, he began. Archmaester Theobald was leading the defenses of the Citadel, Sam said. Chairs, benches, and desks were being stacked at the doors. It was all we had. Every acolyte who wasn't doing that was helping the maesters grab books and scrolls. They were being stored in the vaults below the Citadel. The Ironborn, led by Lord Spar, tried breaking down the door. Theobald demanded that they stop, and they put an arrow in his side. Is he dead? Jon asked. It was clear that Sam had a lot of respect for the man just by the way he spoke. Sam shook his head. He's recovering at the Citadel, making sure that everything is put back to rights. I'm glad he's not dead. Being the seneschal isn't a coveted job. Seneschal? Jon asked. The governor of the Citadel, Sam explained. It didn't help that he was the former archmaester of Warcraft. So you lost your leader, Jon said. Who stepped up? I did, Sam said shyly. The Captain Greyjoy approached the crack in the door and asked to speak with someone. No one else spoke, so I did. After that, everyone looked to me. Jon clapped Sam on the shoulder proudly. You stood up to Victarion Greyjoy. Sam shrugged awkwardly. It was nothing, he mumbled. He said that he would give us one more chance in the morning to surrender, then his men would attack. They did, but we managed to beat them back. How? Jon asked, surprised. Using our wits, Sam answered. That's all we had. Oh, a few of the acolytes could swing a hammer, but against raiders we would have been carved to pieces. We held out for 4 days before Lord Mace arrived. And you led them, Jon said, sounding both proud and amazed. It seems you're truly Randall Tarley's son. Sam smiled quietly. Ironic, isn't it? Jon laughed and took a drink of his ale. Well, I am glad you're still alive. I'm sorry that you've had to go through that. Sam nodded slowly. Old Town was hit hard. Jon, so many women were raped and beaten. Men were slaughtered. Every member of the Citadel, Maester, Archmaester, and Acolyte, spent days with the injured and dying. The Citadel had changed, from a place of learning to a battlefield, then a hospital in a week. The large man hung his head. It's not something I ever want to see again. I'm sorry, Jon said quietly. I know you left to get away from the war. Westeros is at war, Sam grunted. And I can't run. Jon couldn't help but let out a bit of a chuckle at his friend's words. Even when sharing a scary and bloody memory, he was still making light of the situation. Jon had missed his optimism. I had heard that you had gone north after the Ironborn attacked the north, Sam said, changing the subject. You're alive, so it couldn't have been that bad. Jon smiled grimly. After taking Moat Cailin, I was preparing to split my army and attack both the western front, where the Destins and Ryswells were, and the Dread Fort in the east. Divide and conquer, Sam summarized. Exactly, Jon said. That changed when the Company of the Rose landed in the north. How did that come to be? Sam asked curiously. He still had an intense love of history. The company was formed by Eddard Stark, the king who knelt. Jon explained. He was afraid of the power held by the Targaryens with their dragons. So he formed a sellsword company with men and women from the noble houses in the north. A preservation plan, Sam said. Amazing. There are even some extinct houses among them, Jon said. Grey Stark, Red Stark, Greenwood, Fisher, and many more. Archmaester Tollan will be deeply intrigued by this, Sam said. Jon gave him a confused look, and Neister in training further explained. Archmeister of History. It was certainly interesting to learn, Jon said. They managed to save my father and Arya, bringing them to Brevos before returning them to the north. Help the Northern Army reclaim Eagle's Roost and take the Dreadfort. Will they return to Essos? Sam asked curiously. Jon shrugged. I'm not sure. I assume not. The only reason they did return was because of Robb. Why Robb? Sam asked. When Torrhen Stark made the company, they had two missions. The first was to survive. The second was to return to Westeros when a Stark once again wore the crown of winter. Jon explained. Sam nodded slowly. Very interesting. The two men fell into an awkward silence, neither sure what to say. They had spoken a lot on the road to River Run, growing closer as friends. Neither man seemed inclined to go into much detail about the battles that they fought in. Jon glanced at Sam and noticed for the first time that he had a scar going across the top of his head. It certainly hadn't been there before. Are you going to talk to them? Sam asked suddenly. Sorry? Jon asked, caught off guard by the question. The Targaryens, Sam clarified. After all, they're kind of your family. They're not the family that I choose to recognize. Jon grunted. I'm sure they want no part of me, and I have already made up my mind that I want no part of them. Why? Sam asked. He had accepted that Jon didn't want to be known as the son of Rhaegar, especially after the way he had been conceived, but now that he was so close to other members of his father's house, Sam was curious to see if Jon would interact with them. Jon had no intention of doing such a thing. Robb said that Rhaegar's other son is there. Jon explaining, pointing in the direction of King's Landing. What am I supposed to say? How am I to explain that I'm Rhaegar's other son, that he had with another woman? Another thought occurred to Jon. The Dornish are over there as well. How will they take it if the product of Rhaegar's affair showed up? Bearing the sword of House Targaryen, no less. It could mean that you should sit on the Iron Throne, Sam mumbled. I'm not sitting on that blasted chair, Jon barked. Sam held his hands up. Fine, fine, I just wanted to ask. Who else knows, besides Robb? My father, Lady Stark, and Arya. Rickon will be told when he's older, and I haven't seen Sansa much. She's usually with Lady Olenna. Margaery or Harold Arryn, Jon said. I will tell the rest of my family eventually, but besides you and Lord Reed, no one else can know. Sam nodded. Of course. Jon drained the last of his ale and cradled the tankard in his hands, looking out the entrance of the tent where men of the Company of the Rose were going about their business, sharpening weapons, repairing armor, playing games, or just resting. They were experienced soldiers, one and all, and knew that it was wise to rest when possible. Many of the men were Westerosi born, probably because of the company's reputation. It was a safe, boring company where a man could expect a good fight and decent coin, but not too much of either. Most of the other companies, all of which were not that far away, was where the true adventurers and sellswords went to find money and a fight. Have you seen Robb yet? Jon asked finally. Sam shook his head. I heard that Lord Stark had arrived from the north. I wasn't sure, so I asked around and found that you were here too. That's how you ended up at my tent, Jon guessed. Well, come on. It's still light out. Let's go see Robb. Sam got up, hesitantly. Is right now a good time? Jon shrugged. Now is probably better than later. Being king doesn't give him a lot of free moments. Sam nodded and drained the last of his ale before grabbing his staff and satchel and following Jon out of the tent. The two men made their way through camp towards the large tent in the center that had two poles set on either side of the entrance, each bearing a crowned direwolf banner. Jon saw no guards outside and quickened his pace a bit, catching Sam off guard. What's wrong? He asked. Where are Robb's guards? Jon asked, talking more to himself than Sam as the two men burst into the tent. Jon half drawing his sword as he did, scanning the main chamber where Robb met with his advisors. Come on, Jon growled, drawing his sword fully. Robb? There was no reply from behind the sectioned-off area, where Robb and Margaery slept. Jon felt a sick feeling seeping into his gut. He knew instantly that something had happened. Robb's body laid on the floor, almost as if he was dead. There was a pool of blood forming around him, and a dagger that didn't look like it belonged to Robb was on the floor, next to his hand. Marjorie was asleep on the bed, and didn't look at all disturbed. There was no sound or movement coming from the crib, where Torrhen was. Help me get him on the bed, Sam ordered, his voice having new authority. Jon dropped his sword and scooped up his brother, grunting slightly as he lifted the body onto the bed. Sam was immediately over him, ripping open his jerkin with Robb's dagger. On Robb's right breast, opposite of his head, was a jagged stab wound that had caused the skin around it to be tinged blue. "What's happened to him?" Jon asked, watching as Sam began to pull vials from his satchel. "Check the queen and the baby," Sam snapped. "Make sure they're breathing." Jon ran over to Marguerite, putting his ear next to her mouth. Thankfully, he felt her breath soft on his ear. She looked just as unconscious as the dire wolf. Jon knew that she had to have been drugged, or else she would have woken up. "Feel for a pulse," Sam ordered. "Find a vein near her wrist and press 2 fingers on it." Jon did as he was instructed, and was rewarded with a faint thump feeling that was slow, but constant. "She has one," Jon confirmed. "Do the same for the baby," Sam ordered. As Jon went over to Torrhen's crib, he heard a crack as he stepped on something. Lifting up his boot, he found a smashed glass vial and a dark stain. Jon immediately checked Torrhen's breathing and found that he too was sleeping. "He's alive," Jon said. "How's Robb?" "I don't know," Sam said unhappily. "I think he can help," a new voice said from the entrance. Tyrion Lannister, accompanied by 2 other men, had entered the room. The 2 men bore a fourth between them. He was dressed like a servant, with choppy brown hair and a feminine-looking face. "He's the assassin?" Jon asked. "My friends and I were taking a stroll, and found him sneaking out of the tent." Tyrion explained. "He was bleeding, and was hiding this under his cloak," he said, holding up a bloody dagger that looked to be covered in some sort of clear liquid. Jon marched over to the man, grabbing his chin and forcing him to look at Jon. There was nothing but contempt in his eyes, obviously annoyed that he had been caught. He certainly wasn't from Westeros. "What did you put on the knife?" Jon demanded. "Valar Morghulis," the man growled. "Jon, I think I know how to make this man talk," Tyrion said, still in that friendly, almost sarcastic manner. Tyrion waved the knife in front of the assassin. "Whatever you put on this, I'm guessing it causes horrible death." "Jon, what?" "Rip his sleeve," Tyrion said. Jon glared at the man as he ripped off one sleeve, exposing the man's pale forearm. Tyrion held up the knife again and slowly carved a line into the man's forearm, right where a long vein was. The man cried out in pain as Tyrion did this. When the imp was done, he wiped the blade on the wound, ensuring that any remaining poison the blade made it into the arm. "Now, if you don't want to die a horrible death, tell us what the hell you put on this knife," Tyrion said. The assassin started to ramble off a bunch of words that Jon had never heard of, but by the face Sam made, they weren't good. When he was done, Sam went back to rummaging through his satchel, pulling out vials and herbs, putting them all together next to Robb's still body. Soon, he had a bluish-green liquid ready. "Give it to him first," Tyrion instructed. "That way we make sure he isn't lying." Sam did as he was told, pouring half of the mixture into the man's mouth, but keeping the vial far away enough so that it couldn't be knocked out of his hand. When the assassin drank it all, he nodded to Sam. "Quickly, bind my arm." "Don't," Jon ordered. "The poison won't kill him, but the loss of blood will." "Quite right," Tyrion said with an approving nod. "I believe we are done with you." "What's happened?" Father bellowed, storming into the room. Darren and Lady Stark were at his back. Darren had his sword at the ready. Jon held up a hand. "Sam, I've got this," Sam replied, already busy at work, administering the antidote to Robb. "But send for another maester. I need a bandage for the king and more supplies." "I'll send for one," Lady Stark said, quickly leaving. "Outside, all of you," Jon ordered. The group spilled out into the main chamber, where Brienne was kneeling next to the still form of Petrek Malister. Jon could just make out an angry red line around the man's throat. Jon wasn't sure if he was dead or not. "What happened?" Father demanded. "This man," Jon said, gesturing to the struggling assassin who was spilling blood on the floor, "tried to kill Robb. Robb, I believe, fought back. When the man tried to escape, Tyrion and his companions caught him and brought him back." "I thought he would be of some use," Tyrion said, taking up the story. "He was." "What happened to his arm?" Darren asked. "I cut it with his knife," Tyrion said matter-of-factly. "I knew he wouldn't tell us if his life wasn't in peril." He told Sam what he put on the knife he stabbed Robb with. Sam was able to make an antidote. Jon took over. When he gave the man the liquid, he asked for his arm to be bandaged up. It was clear that the antidote was the right one. Robb's being given it now. Father glanced at the man's arm. He won't die quickly. Before anyone else could speak, Darren whipped his sword across the man's neck. Blood sprayed on the floor, and Darren's boots as the body was let go off. Immediately a pool of blood was beginning to form. Father turned on his cousin. "We needed his name," he shouted. "I know his name." Darren replied calmly. "Lesson Omar, the spy master of the Golden Company."